Today's lesson follows a narrow investigation path inside one thin film heat transfer benchmark. The question is not, can we retell a full experiment from raw traces? The question is, within one bounded thin film benchmark, which route best explains the mismatch from a simple continuum expectation as the Al2O3 layer gets thicker? This is a benchmark comparison, not a reconstructed experiment. Start with the boundary. The packet closes on a planar, cross-plane multilayer system in the thermoreflectance family, an aluminum transducer on ALD Al2O3 on native-oxide-present silicon. That boundary immediately rules out a lot of stories. There is no internal flow here, there is no intended phase change here. And this handoff is not making a claim about a user local specimen. It is using a validated public benchmark packet for comparison inside one thin film family. Now tighten the lesson to one variable. Only one knob is being used to discriminate the routes, Al2O3 thickness. In the retained benchmark cases, the two XRR thicknesses are 4.67 nanometers and 9.39 nanometers. So the lesson spine is simple. Boundary, one variable changed, what shifted, what did not shift, and what remains unresolved. What shifted is the strongest teaching point in the packet. At 467 nanometers, the interface term accounts for about 69% of total resistance. At 939 nanometers, it drops to about 52.5%, with the film term rising toward parity. That is why the final bounded red is not interface only across the whole range and not film only across the whole range either. It is interface leaning at the thinner point, but bounded hybrid across the 5 to 10 nm range overall. That shift matters because earlier in the investigation, several routes were still alive. But once the boundary was tightened to a solid multi-layer benchmark, turbulence first and phase-coupled heterogeneity were removed from lead consideration. The live comparison narrowed to interfacial thermal resistance, microscale transport non-locality, and a bounded hybrid. Then the public Al2O3 on-Psi benchmark gave the cleanest first-use discriminator, thickness inside the same family. Now ask the equally important question, what did not shift? The combined interface term stays combined. This lesson does not separate the two interfaces. That is a hard boundary condition in the packet. The source path used here supports a combined total TBR, not an independent value for each interface. So even though the lesson compares interface share and film share, it does not claim a separate aluminum to film resistance and film to silicon resistance. The same caution applies to replay. This packet preserves the key reported values needed for benchmark comparison, including the two XRR thicknesses, an intrinsic Al2O3 conductivity of 1.50 plus 0.09 WMK, and a combined total TBR of 6.92 plus 0.50 M2RK GW. But it does not preserve raw TDTR delay time traces for replay. So this lesson can teach route ranking inside the benchmark boundary, but it cannot honestly speak as if a full trace-level thermoreflectance reconstruction was performed. That brings us to what remains unresolved. The native oxide thickness is unresolved. The individual interface resistances are unresolved. Raw TDTR delay time traces were not recovered. And there is no local run dynamic certification here. Those are not side notes. They define the outer edge of what this benchmark can and cannot do. So, what is the result stated carefully? The validated comparison sheet supports an interface-leaning reading at 4.67 EMI, a shift toward near parity at 9.39 nini, and therefore a bounded hybrid read across the 5 to 10 nini range overall. That is the packet-faithful lesson outcome. It is strong enough for bounded route comparison within this benchmark family, and narrow enough to avoid overstating the evidence. The packet also gives a clear reopen condition. The current benchmark level ranking stands unless the next required inference depends on something the packet does not supply. Raw TDTR delay time traces, modulation frequency replay, or a justified per interface decomposition. If one of those becomes necessary, this lesson no longer sits inside the current handoff. it has to escalate to a heavier evidence path, so the use value is straightforward. This benchmark is good for bounded route comparison inside one thin film family. It is not enough for trace-level replay or direct transfer to a different specimen. That is exactly why the packet closes where it does. Not because the investigation says nothing, but because it says one bounded thing clearly. Derived from CGRP packet, no new investigatory claims added.